none of what, like, I thought that was my reality. I thought that's what I was doomed to be. I used to think that being black was like, okay, black equals being doomed. That is just what I see every day in my lifetime.
Um, I mean, someday maybe I want to buy a bigger house or, more expensive car, but why? It's
Yeah.
no need for it, right? It's pointless. So for me, then it becomes, what do I build? And so now you become a builder. And so now you start to enter into a new phase, right? When it comes to, so sometimes how those people think about us or how the World Bank thinks about, middle class America, I think maybe different, a little bit different than how we think about it.
For sure. So I grew up super poor myself, and it was just like, weird. Like, I didn't really know what the other option was. I knew what I saw around me, which was black people in really nice cars dealing drugs. And to me, that didn't seem good because most people were dead by 25, 30. So for me, it was like, I don't really know what the other option was. When I got adopted, I got adopted by people who had means, lots of them. And it showed me, oh, wow, there's so much more here. And I
How
used
old
to
were you
think
when you got adopted?
like 11, like, yeah, I was 11.
Wow. My partner
So
Amy adopted her son when he was 9. I adopted my son when he was born, but she adopted him when he was 9. So it's a different kind of adoption when you adopt
I'm telling you,
a grown child is the way I put it. Yeah.
being able to see the world and kind of understand, being very aware of how things work, I had that and was like, okay, interesting. So you mean to tell me that none of what, like, I thought that was my reality. I thought that's what I was doomed to be. I used to think that being black was like, okay, black equals being doomed. That is just what I see every day in my lifetime. Then when I got to the other side, I was able to meet, people of means, and most of them happened to be white and very wealthy. And it was like, okay, interesting. So this is where all the wealth is. And then it wasn't until I met, an African American who was beyond wealthy. And I was like, what the hell do you do? The dude's like, well, I designed a system for microwaves to so on and so forth. And I lost track. But basically, the man designed the little trays, the little circular plastic wheel things in the microwave. And I was like, wow. So you built something, and that's how you did it. That's what I wanted to. That's what I always needed to hear was I could build something. So from there, I strive to like build everything. Yeah, and because I was young when I sold my first company, I spent my money on dumb things, stupid things. I learned my lesson. As I got older and more mature, I just realized I can't buy any of the things I wanted to buy. But there was one point where I'm talking to my friends, and they're all 20 something year olds, and talking to them, and they're like, well, I can't just go and spend $1,000 on a vacation. I kind of look over and I'm like, you can't do what? And it wasn't meant to be like hurtful. It was just like, oh man, really? And that kind of really brought me back to when my mom told me we can't spend $30 on the groceries that we need. We can't spend $15 on the groceries we need. And it really showed me, and it brought me right back to where I'd come from. And I decided from that standpoint, I will do my best not to invest any of my money in primary markets. I live in an area that was built for the rich. I mean, like, that's Dallas in a nutshell. That is very much it. But
It's
just
a
outside,
playground of influence.
yeah, right. It was just like, I was able to kind of see it, and I was high up on the playground. I was on the slide until someone kicked my ass off, and I got back down. I was like, okay, yeah. So then I told myself, I'm not going to place any of my investors' money or my money in any primary markets because that's where everything else is. If they want to go take their return and go buy something nice and shiny, by all means, go and do it. But I'm going to focus on providing equity to the people who need it, because when people buy up all these homes and fix them and flip them, no one really thinks, again, most people think like this, right, with their blinders on. When you take those off, you see that every time you flip a $300,000 home, which is way too expensive anyways, for $2.6 million, you're making it substantially harder for the other 8 people down the road who are living paycheck to paycheck. They're going to be forced to leave, and no one's building anything for them because the middle class has been looked down upon, and no one's really, everybody thinks they're fighting for the middle class, but quite honestly, most people are fighting for what they see in the cities. Oh, the inner cities and injustice. That same exact stuff happens literally 2.5 hours outside of any big city, yet it's completely disregarded because it's not happening right in front of people. And that's just one of the things that I think most people have a hard time seeing. Yeah, like, middle class is oftentimes disregarded. No one really knows and or cares because they aren't prevalent in everyday society. That's really what it comes down to for a lot of people, I think.
So you're talking about, growing up, and you're talking about what you see and what you don't see, right? And I think it's fascinating as you grow up as a kid. Like I moved from a very very wealthy parents who actually owned a racetrack in Amarillo, Texas, called Umbarger Park, and
Yeah.
it's outside of Amarillo. It's in one of the suburbs there, and they lost it for all kinds of different reasons. And over the years, we would be middle class, and then we'd be dirt poor, and then we'd be middle class, and then we'd be owning apartments, and then we'd be extremely dirt poor again because of when you have somebody like my father had the ability to build income and build wealth, but then he had addictions that constantly figure out a way to take it away from him, right? And
Yeah.
so that's the roller coaster I grew up with as a kid. And so I would see different communities, right? Different ways of living, different, I could go in one area where, being black would have been, you'd have been an outlier, right? You'd have been the oddball in the community, which is probably what you went through, right? Once you were adopted, being in the influential community you were in, maybe not, depending on what circle your adopted parents ran in. But then in the very next community, the next school I would live in, the next city, and being a white kid, I was, the outlier, right? And so they kind of like I got to see those different dynamics and start to create a little bit of an understanding of those dynamics, right? And but very early on, somewhere I saw that like people are like a lot of their views, a lot of their thoughts on other people or other cultures is based on where they were, how they were raised, where they were brought up. And so when you talk about money, have you ever heard of the money couple? They have a money personality test. Have you ever heard it?
No.
It's really cool. Like it's if you've heard of the five love languages before.
Yes, I have. Okay.
So it's kind of like the five love languages for money, where you have a money personality type, right? And so my money personality types is a flyer risk taker, right? I'm sure your risk taker is one of yours for sure.
Yes.
And so I find that fascinating as you grew up and you went from one to the other, right? Being in those different cultures, I think probably created some of that understanding in a subconscious, in a non-conscious way, right? Of there is a difference, right? There is a difference between wealth and non-wealth. There is, and once you see the other side, you realize that the other side really isn't better.